Well, welcome to the first lesson in this series from the book Calm My Anxious Heart by Linda Dillow. Again, make sure you watch that intro video. It kind of explains how I set up the series and how you can use the book along with the series. But today I want to focus on kind of the introduction to her book and just this idea of what it even means to be content. I don't know about you, but I've met some people in my life that on the outside, at least when you look at their life, you think, man, they have it all. They have a great marriage. Their kids are successful. They seem to be financially secure. They take wonderful vacations. They're leaders in their church. People respect them. And so you look at them and you think, man, they must live such a content life. They must just have no complaints. And then when you get to know that person a little, you find they're complaining about all sorts of things. They're not content at all. They're always looking for, well, my car could be nicer. Or, we always wanted to live in this neighborhood. Or my kids, well, they did this, but I wanted them to go to this university. Whatever it is, that they're not content at all, even though you would look at their life and think, how in the world could you not be? And then maybe you meet this other person who has nothing by the world's standards. Or let me say this, by the American standards. They have a very simple life. Maybe they've gone through a lot of trials and have had a lot of suffering. Maybe they're missionaries on a mission field, and yet they are so at peace with their life. They are so content and so joyful in the Lord. And you look at their life and you think, how can you be content? Look at your life. Look where you live. Look what you don't have. Look at the stresses that you have because you don't make enough money or whatever it is. And yet they have something on the inside that you're like, I want to know more what they have. That's what this whole book is kind of about, is just getting to that place that we look beyond our circumstances. We look beyond the outside and we really get to the inside of who we are, who God is to us, and why that will affect the way we see and view life and the way we live our lives. So to begin this video, I just want to start with a clear definition of what contentment means, because that's going to be important for us if you want to live a life, or if you're thinking, I do want to calm my anxious heart. I do want to live a life of contentment. What does that mean? Well, here's a definition. Contentment is a state of peace separate from our circumstances. Okay, so it's a state of peace separate from our circumstances. So we hear already in this definition that there's something about peace, which who doesn't want peace, right? I want peace. But it's separate from our circumstances. Now, that gets a little trickier. How's that going to work out? Here's a beautiful quote that J.I. Packer said that I love, and I just want to read it to you because I think it's great just thinking about how to view contentment or a life of contentment. And here it is. Contentment is essentially a matter of accepting from God's hand what He sends because we know that He is good and therefore it is good. So see, even from that quote, we can start to discover that contentment, this life of contentment, this life of having peace, is not about our circumstances. It's not about what we get or what we have. So back to my earlier example, it's not about looking at the person who is wealthy or has all the successes by our American standards. That person should be content. No, it's about something on the inside. It's about understanding who God is and what He gives us, and that He is good, and therefore what He brings into our path and into our life, it must be good for us, even in the situations that we don't understand. Now, that's going to be a hard definition we're going to have to keep coming back to that, right? It's not me defining contentment and now everybody's like, right, now I can live a contented life. No, it is going to be a daily struggle for us. But let's remember, as we talk over the coming weeks, as we learn how to be content, as we learn how to calm our anxious hearts and not let fear and angst overwhelm us, let's remember that contentment is a peace that is beyond our circumstances. Now, Paul gives us a sense of this. Let's look at Philippians chapter 4 and how he talks about the life of contentment that he lived. Not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it's with a full stomach or an empty stomach, with plenty or little. Now see, Paul's talking about something here. He's had times in his life where he was on the mountaintop experience, right? Of having it all, of just feeling like I'm good, I'm smart, I'm successful, I'm doing great. People are listening to me, they're receiving the gospel message. And then he's also had times where he was thrown out of cities and people were wanting to do terrible things to him and were trying to arrest him, and he's lived in poverty. And yet Paul is saying, I've learned to live in either of those circumstances. And the reason is because of contentment. And the reason, actually, in the end, is more about how Paul chose to see the world, and it's the way we need to choose to see the world. That leads me to my next point, which is this. The key to contentment is in our perspective. See, ladies, here's something that we need to realize. And I know this is so hard because I really feel like I know what's best for me. I know myself, I know my needs, I know my kids, I know what they need. And yet what God's saying and what Paul's saying in Philippians and what this definition is about of contentment is that it isn't about what I think. It's not about my perspective and how I see the world, because I'm limited in my ability to understand it, right? I only know what's happening right now as I'm speaking. I know what happened in the past, but I definitely don't know what's going to happen 1 minute from now. Yet we serve a God who has beginning and end in mind. He is not controlled by time. So his perspective should be our perspective. We should yield our lives and the way we view this life, the way we have our perspective on how we see everything in our life, we should do it through God's lens, not our own. And if we can do that, then I think we will find that we can get to that life of contentment where when life's hardships come our way and when we're overwhelmed by something or disappointed or something takes us off guard, that we aren't just all of a sudden like, well, I have to rely on myself to figure this out. No, it's about finding an inner peace and knowing that God's perspective, his way, his plan is going to lead the way if we allow it. Now, in the book, this was kind of a neat example that I thought was really great for us to think about, because if we really want to know God's perspective, then we have to read his word, right, ladies? I mean, that's part of this. If we want to know God's heart, if we want to know his plan for our lives, if we want to know who he is and what his character is about, then we have to read the Bible to know. That's why he gave us his word, to show us, to tell us who he is and how he wants us to live. And so the way the author talks about it is kind of like that tea bag, that when you make a cup of tea, you put that tea bag in the water, and the longer you let it steep, right? The longer it's in there and it's infusing its herbs in there, and the stronger it's going to be. The better the cup of tea, the more that it steeps. And that's kind of the way it works for us in our Christian walk. If we really want to live a life of contentment, then we need to get God's perspective by reading his word. And the more of reading his word and thinking about God's perspective over our own, the more we do that, the stronger we're going to be in our ability to live a contented life. We're going to have a stronger cup of tea when we let God's word infuse itself in our life and in our thinking and in our actions and in our emotions and in our values and the things that we prioritize. So that's what this series is going to be about, is kind of working through in these different areas of our lives. How can we live a life of contentment? How can we find that peace that goes beyond our circumstances? How can we let God's perspective win out over our perspective? So use those questions below, have a conversation about this series, and read the book along with how I break it down, and have a great conversation and start to learn, how do you need to view contentment? How do I need to view contentment? And how am I going to start applying that in my life and actually start living that out?